The story kicks off with a glimpse into Vali's home, nestled in Kavadi, Tamil Nadu, India. In this serene setting, surrounded by chirping birds and whispering leaves, Vali moves gracefully to an invisible rhythm. Her gestures exude prayerful reverence and fluidity. In another scene, a man meets with a pujari in a sanctuary to bless him for the journey he's about to embark on. Carrying his sitar slung over his shoulder, he contemplates the route for his trip. As the screen darkens, a silhouette emerges, walking down a dimly lit aisle. There's soft music, accompanied by the prominent sound of gurgling water. The intensity of the gurgling grows and so does the music, drawing attention to the water below. It's a crimson red. Aggressive bubbles rise to the surface, and a hand stretches forward, no doubt wanting help or to escape. But it's all a nightmare that has Chris jolting forward and gasping for air. Sometime after that dream, Chris embarks on a journey to Tamil Nadu. His seatmate pesters him with questions in Tamil, asking where he's originally from. Chris speaks back fluent Tamil, basically saying he'd rather not be bothered. 17 years earlier, it's the same open space hall. This time, however, it's Parvati on the dance floor. She's an expert on how to make the gunghru around her ankles jingle melodiously. While she dances, John and Claire are in a corner with the children, pulling some yoga-inspired moves. Chris joins in on the fun. His father becomes a support for a shoulder stand acrobat move. Vali is more of the quiet type. She remains seated, watching the family, watching Chris have his Superman moment with his arms and legs all sprawled out. Nagarjun, Parvati's husband and Vali's father, shows he's a musician with his classical tunes that have Parvati moving so energetically and smoothly. John can also sing too, and play the guitar. And there are moments he would join Nagarjun to create music Parvati could move to. Claire could be seen closer to the children of the community, gathering them to tell stories. When she wasn't engaged with the children, she was engaged with the cooking. It was a peaceful home, one filled with cheerful memories that still sing many years later. Chris reaches a path he would need to access by foot, and pays off the tricycle that has brought him this far. While Chris walks the foot trail to his former home, Parvati is concluding a narration she isn't too pleased with. Sabapathy doesn't see what's wrong with it. Parvati argues it would have been different had it been written by a woman. Sabapathy warns the audience won't be so receptive. But Parvati couldn't care less what the audience think. Vali is present, but mute, until she hears footsteps and informs her mother that someone is at the back gate. Vali is the one who steps out to receive Chris. It's not initially clear if she recognizes who she sees, because she pauses on the steps as if to fully register who he is before getting closer. She informs him he's come the wrong way. The main entrance is at the other side, she points out. Chris replies he took the forest trail, and the back gate was once the main entrance. Chris asks if he can be let in, and what's funny is how Vali easily lifts up the bamboo stick holding the gate, with a smirk. She jokes that coming in would be easier if he could open the gate. He goes for a handshake once he's let through. Their hands touch long enough for Vali to remind him they can't hold hands forever. Vali leads Chris to the house. Parvati is still talking about the play, and how the dancers should react. Parvati immediately recognizes Chris, who is surprisingly cold to her. He states his purpose of his visit is to find his father. Parvati's still excited to see him, chiming about how much he's grown. She even refers to him as Skanda, which is most likely a nickname he once had. Chris reiterates he wants to know where his father is, and Parvati exchanges an urgent look with Vali before admitting that his father is not present. Chris turns to go, but Parvati adds his father will be back. It's enough to keep Chris from walking away, asking when his father will indeed return. Parvati admits John wanders and returns. There's no sure time, but he always comes back. Parvati then pleads with Chris to stay and await John's return. Chris asks if the invite is genuine, and sadness crosses Parvati's face. She calls him the nickname and tells him he's home. Vali calls his name, and it seems to soften him. Parvati tells her to show him to his father's room, but Vali prefers they take a stroll first. Chris agrees. As the youngsters leave, Sabapathy hopes out loud for John's quick return. Parvati agrees, until Sabapathy expresses further how John's presence would increase ticket sales for the play. Parvati reprimands him for his thinking process. Vali takes Chris to watch dancers practice for the play. Two elderly people, a man and a woman, each move their bodies to express the wording of the storytelling song. Vali introduces the woman's character as Rama's mother, Kausalya. She's longing for her missing daughter-in-law, whom she loves like her own blood. The male dancer is Janaka, Sita's father, who has reasons to be furious and heartbroken simultaneously. Chris comments the music sounds good, and Vali expresses it as like this because Sanskrit is a divine language. They both walk away from the dancers and stroll down a forest path. Chris starts up a conversation, asking for the story behind the play. Chris tells him it's from the last episode of the Ramayana. It's an episode he should remember. The character Lava gets to meet his estranged father after many years, which Chris can't help but note sounds a lot like his own dilemma. As they look around, Chris's demeanor lightens. Vali shows him the shrine where miniature statues have been stashed. One of them is named Skanda. The house he once knew had to be rebuilt, because it was destroyed by termites. Vali reveals John wasn't around much to maintain it. What has him chuckling is an old car he can't believe still exists. Valley drives it now. Chris finds himself down memory lane. That same car had once driven by the banks of the river. The two families are there, John's and Nargarjan's. They watch children play in the mud river. Chris asks his father if they can build a mud pool back home, and John agrees. Maybe it's being told that clay is good for the skin, or just his inner child. But John proposes they join the river fun in the meantime. He gets what he wants, and while him and the two children are in the water, Claire is seated on the sand with Valley's parents. Nargarjan asks how Claire met John, and she narrates that fate brought them together at Bernairs, at the Nats of the river Ganga. It was her first trip to India with her parents, and John had her heart with the way he told the story about Ganga. Her parents, however, were not so receptive. Parvathy chimes in that Claire's parents will eventually accept John, as he makes a great father. John and the children are oblivious to the conversation, still playing about in the water, and then there's just a momentary flash of that familiar sound of gurgling. When the day is over, the adults are seen leisurely dancing and singing. The children step in, wanting to be tucked in for the night. The same dimly lit aisle from Chris's dreams appears. This time, it's John walking Valley and Chris to bed. While John babysits, Parvathy dances to the lyrical poetry, Gita Govinda, and interprets the lyrics for a mesmerized Claire. Parvathy becomes like a dancer in a play as she uses her gestures to emphasize what is being said in the song. Claire reveals to the Indian couple that her mother is Indian, and her father Austrian. 5 years later, Nargarjan still has just as much musical and dancing prowess. Parvathy is seen painting. John kept to his word and built a mud pool the children can play in. Claire was right. John is a father that can't say no, although there is no physical appearance of Chris's parents at this time. The children have grown not just in size, but in adaptation to the culture. Chris wears a dhoti and partakes in a bhakti and nritya. Back to the present, Valley and Chris return to the house, done with their stroll. Memory lane accentuates Parvathy's paintings lining the walls. Valley shows Chris to his father's room, and the first thing that catches his attention is a painting of what appears to be his father. Chris dresses in a dhoti and steps out to watch Valley dance for a while. He then wanders off to one of the open halls, where he finds Nargarjan engrossed in a dance and recitation. Chris waits for Nargarjan to be done before stepping into view. Nargarjan fails to recognize him at first, and asks if he's a dancer. Chris replies that he is, and on a closer look, Nargarjan admits that he looks familiar. Chris reveals his name, and Nargarjan makes a familiar statement to the one Parvathy made, that has Chris suddenly acting cold. Nargarjan tries to pacify him by stating it's good to have him home. Chris remains cold. Nargarjan had been playing Rama. The play is known for its missing character, Sita. Chris correlates himself to Sita, asking Nargarjan if his display of longing is all just an act. Nargarjan and Parvathy speak afterwards. Parvathy comments on how Chris looks very much like his father. Nargarjan reveals they didn't have a friendly conversation earlier, and Chris is different from the boy he once knew. What's more is that Claire cut them off. Parvathy's features are washed with sadness as she admits she feels responsible for everything that went wrong. During one incident, when the children are still young, but Chris old enough to play the guitar almost as well as his father, Claire makes a salad. She and Valley sit on the swings and listen to father and son play the guitar. Parvathy steps in with an offering from the Ganesha temple for them to snack on. Claire isn't pleased with the gesture and storms off. Parvathy isn't happy that she's upset Claire, but she doesn't go to apologize. Instead, she takes Claire's spot on the swing and watches Chris and John perform. Nargarjan joins in, too, but Claire remains inside the house. The music draws her close enough to the window, though, to listen for a while before she takes her leave again. On another day, the children are learning different emotions in the Sanskrit language, and how to use gestures to express those emotions. Claire comes over to fetch them for their other set of lessons, and Chris asks if they could enjoy the Sanskrit lessons instead for a bit longer. Parvathy is wise to dismiss the children into Claire's care, but just when she's settled with the children and is in full teaching mode, John walks by and proposes they go to the beach. Chris pitches they can learn better about the wind from their lessons from the beach. It would be like a practical class. Claire concedes and is even persuaded to join them. Parvathy is drawn back to reality. Nargarjan advises her to let the past go. Parvathy recalls her own childhood with a missing father. In her case, he was gone before she got to meet him. Yet, she still longs for him. She can't even fathom what Chris must be going through with the absence of a father he at least knew. Her earnest prayer is that John comes home soon. The distinctive sound of the mridangam, a sort of drum, is resonating through the air. Valley and a male dancer are engaged in a dance-off, where the male dancer is to exude the character lava. Nargarjan isn't pleased with his energy and asks the dancer to take a seat, especially after he messes up one of the hand gestures. Nargarjan then asks Chris to take the stage and show the previous dancer how it's done. For the first time, we see Chris dance. Where the energy is lacking, he brings it solely to the table. It's a worthy dance-off that has Valley commending, and her father smiling proudly. After the dance-off, Valley and Chris walk along the forest trail, probably heading to the house. Parvathy waits for them halfway and asks that they walk with her. She then engages them in a story. She tells them about her mother, Kanema, who was once Valley's current age when a terrible drought shook the village. She was taught a composition that had the power to make rain come, and Kanema prayed to the goddess Annapurna for her blessings. The rain eventually did come. This made Valley's grandmother famous. To show appreciation for the rain, Kanema made a vow to dance at the goddess's temple in Devprayag, but she never made it there. Her husband was her companion on the journey. They reached Haridwar, but he left her momentarily to attend to a sick patient. He, however, never returned to his pregnant wife. What's more harrowing is that he didn't know Kanema was pregnant. Kanema waited in Haridwar, but when she found out she was pregnant, she took the decision to leave. There was an epidemic of tuberculosis, and she thought only of the safety of her baby. She returned home without ever getting to Devprayag or seeing her husband again. What kept hope alive was the news of a doctor in the same vicinity, trying to cure the people from the epidemic. Kanema was sure her husband was that doctor, and he would return back to her when the sickness was gone. But that never happened. The point of the backstory is to show Chris that him and Parvati share a similar pain, the absence of a father. She then questions why he has returned in the first place. Chris opens up about his reoccurring nightmare. It's always the same one, with him swimming, trying to get to his father. He can see his father standing in the water and singing. Chris always drowns before he can get to his father. The nightmare leaves him shaken and restless. When Valley and Chris are alone, Valley admits it's the first time she's hearing the story behind her grandparents. Her mother hasn't mentioned it until now. Chris feels she told the story to assure him he wasn't alone in his anguish. While Valley understands, she wonders just what else her mother has withheld. Chris has the courage to admit the dance-off the other day was the first time he's moved without fear in a while. Normally, he can't seem to pick up a rhythm, but with Valley, he feels safe enough to take bold steps. Valley makes him realize he's returned after 12 years. It correlates with the same age Lava met his father, Rama, for the first time. The difference is that Chris did know his father. Chris disagrees. John might have changed in all these years. Will he recognize the new John? Chris wonders why his father decided to stay back in Tamil Nadu. He has an inkling it's because he fell in love with Parvati. Back down memory lane, the first known friction between John and Claire unravels. She makes a pot of noodles that the children eagerly try with their hands. Claire reprimands their improper behavior, teaching them how to eat with cutlery. She gets up to fetch more noodles, and the children's giggles make her catch John using his hands rather than the cutlery. Claire isn't happy and expresses it by telling John off for setting a bad example for the children. He's a wounded dog for only a moment before he does it again, making Claire angrier. He tries to wave it off as not a big deal, but Claire stands her ground. When the children are by themselves, Valley notes Claire has become rather strict. Chris adds she gets hard on their father more often. Valley also notes John is naturally goofy. Chris explains he does it to make them happy. It's hard to see his parents' personalities clash, but Valley assures she's there for him. This lightens his demeanor, and next thing he's springing up a tree, perching on the highest branch. Valley waves and smiles at him from below. At the house, as her husband lounges nearby, Claire moves about the room with agitation, vigorously cleaning and ignoring his inquiries about snacks. When he probes into the unexpected visit from her parents, she responds tersely, emphasizing their right to spend time with their grandson as they age. Attempting to diffuse the tension, her husband offers well-intentioned advice, only to be met with an outburst from Claire. She reminds him of her choice to be with him despite her parents' disapproval. He's hurt by her words and goes on to say she was never forced to be part of anything. Claire flares up, accusing John of spending too much time with Parvati. It constantly makes her wonder if his relationship with Valley's mother is as innocent as it seems. Night comes, but things aren't any better. John previously discussed with Claire that Chris stays with Parvati, away from this toxicity of their fighting. Claire doesn't see how that makes sense, as she's Chris's mother. She proposes John could just stop disagreeing with her so often, for peace to reign. John questions Claire's love for him, but she doesn't bother with the reply. Chris is in his room, overhearing his parents' conversation regardless. The mud pool still exists. Valley finds Chris dozed off in it. His excuse is that the water is warm. The luxury has to be cut short, as Valley informs him he has guests. But how will he meet those guests if she has his clothes? She teases him long enough to lose at her own games. Chris is ready to pull out of the water if need be. Valley reports back to Parvati how she found Chris sleeping in the mud pool. She sits next to her mother, which makes her get too comfortable with some questions. She wants to know if her father was ever jealous of Parvati and John's relationship. Parvati admits there were moments, then asks Valley if there's something specific she's prying to find. Valley's courage weans a bit, but she's still nosy. Her mother has a diary with her, and Valley wants a look. One look from her mother, though, has Valley backing off. Years ago, John was returning late to the compound. Parvati spotted him and asked why he wasn't asleep. He mentioned he had trouble sleeping, and a melody stuck in his head. When he hummed it out loud, Parvati recognized it as Hemavati, the name of a raga. The melody poured out from John as he began to strum his guitar. Parvati fell in line, dancing to the tune. Their activity drew Claire out of the house, who remained in the shadows watching, even as Parvathy and John stepped out of view. Claire tiptoed after them. Parvathy asked John to take off his shirt and let down his hair. She had her canvas with her, and made the painting Chris would see hanging many years later. The crescendo comes. Claire has had enough and she's leaving, taking Chris with her. John pleads that she stay, but she gives him an ultimatum: his family, or his commitment to the village. John tries to haggle. Claire can leave if she wants, but Chris has to stay. Claire doesn't see how that's going to be possible. Who's going to raise him properly? Certainly not Parvathy. If her jealousy rules, then so be it. Parvathy gives Chris a token called Rudraksha, a teardrop of the god Shiva that will protect him wherever he goes. Chris asks why Shiva had to cry, and Parvathy tells him he did so because his son was leaving him. She gives Chris a farewell hug before he turns to his father. John promises to come visit Chris. He leads Chris to his mother and reluctantly lets go. Valley promises to never let him go. Ultimately, they all watch Chris and Claire drive out of the village. The aftermath is a devastated, weeping John that can't even find comfort in music. Staring at a sketch of his father, Chris weeps now. Nagarjun is there to comfort him in his own way, by telling Chris how John's singing is unique, coming from the soul. He listens to a song and makes up his own lyrics to the melody. Chris wants to know what it feels like dancing to his father's music, and admits a part of his father followed him in his career as a dancer. Chris opens up about his time away. He talks about being bullied into solitude because he was different. What hurt the most was the lack of support from the family he left behind. He started to feel rejected by both his father and his adoptive parents, Parvathy and Nagarjun. Nagarjun explains they were not able to contact him. John wrote letters to Chris and his grandparents that were always returned. They tried their best to reach him for a very long time. Turns out Chris was forced into nomadicity. He was never in one place longer than 2 years. All this time, Chris was under the impression that they knew where he was. The conversation is cut short when Valley comes to get Chris for a walk. She takes him to a place John had shown her. She and John sometimes visited the area, and Chris can be assured John missed him a lot. Valley asks Chris where he's been all these years. It was in Perth he connected with Bharatanatyam. There was a Kalakshetra teacher in the neighborhood. Chris had just turned 18 and felt the urge to dance, so he joined her classes. He began having freeze spells, unable to move to a rhythm. He told her about his life in Kavadi, and his teacher helped him understand that he needed to reconnect with his father to be able to dance again. Sabapathy is once again present, discussing the Rama play and what the audience would appreciate. This time it's Valley who speaks up against the circumstances Sita is subjected to. Sabapathy emphasizes the play has to start with Sita pregnant and alone in the forest. Valley argues that Sita can't be alone. She has the forest deities to worship her. Her daughter's words strikes a chord of inspiration, and Parvathy paints a picture of a pregnant woman celebrated by other women. Valley asks if that's Sita her mother has painted, but Chris sees it's Claire. Parvathy knew Claire when she was pregnant with Chris. Chris also clarifies that the painting in his father's room is of his father. Parvathy expresses she sees John as a deity. Valley has somewhere she'd like to show Chris. She takes Chris to the hillside, where they reflect on how Sita should hate Rama, yet she doesn't. That's the power of love. It makes understanding easy. It makes Chris question if his parents understood each other, but the foundational question is if they loved each other. The hillside provides a beautiful view. Valley points out a building with the writing, Skanda Ashram. Valley shows Chris he was missed. Later, Valley directs a similar question posed to her mother toward her father. Did he ever feel jealous of Parvathy's relationship with John? Nagarjun admits he was, initially. When he saw the painting, the same one in John's room, the jealousy faded. Chris takes time to read his father's letters to him. Maybe that's what inspires him to pick up his guitar and strum to a familiar melody. Valley initially confuses the voice to be John's and runs after it. She finds Chris instead, and there's peace in that. The day of the play arrives, and Chris is on stage. What he fears would happen, happens. What has happened times before. He freezes on the spot, feet too rooted to dance. John couldn't pick a better time to show up. He sings the song he made for his son years ago. The same one Chris was singing only days ago. Chris unfreezes and falls into the tune, bringing the same energy he did during the earlier dance-off with Valley. John draws closer to the stage, and when the note is over, Chris falls into a longing hug. The audience applauds. It's not exactly how the performance was supposed to go, but like Sabapathy predicted, John was bound to sell the audience.